Hello, everyone. Welcome to, sorry, the waiting room is still happening. Welcome to our kind of non-traditional film and lecture series. This is our second event of the season. So this is a post-film discussion. Again, the homework was that everyone watched the incredible documentary, I Am Not Your Negro. Dr. Tarrell Campbell came to ECC 2 years ago we screened the film, and then he gave a presentation and led a Q&A, and it was just one of the best events we've had. And so when we considered having 2 encore events for these online discussions, this was certainly top of mind to invite Dr. Campbell back, and we're so thankful that he's here. So I'm going to give him a brief introduction and then turn the event over to him. If you have any thoughts or questions during or after the presentation, go ahead and use the chat feature, and we'll kind of engage, at least starting out using that after the presentation. So Dr. Campbell is currently Assistant Dean in College of Arts and Sciences and a lecturer of college writing at Washington University in St. Louis. He's a native St. Louisan. He teaches in the college writing program at WashU and works with online and local organizations as a copywriter, editor, and content publisher. He received his doctorate in English language and literature from St. Louis University in 2018. Beyond work, he runs, bikes, and thoroughly enjoys a multitude of digital media platforms. He's been married to his beautiful wife, Carousel, since 2007 and lives in the metro area with their 3 cats. So it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Tarrell Campbell.
Hello, how are you all today? Good, huh? So
Good.
Zoom environment here, right? It is a pleasure to be here with you all. I thought that I present a talk this evening on what kind of glues Baldwin and Evers and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King together. And I hope that at the conclusion of my talk, you will also see the similarities with people like Booker T. Washington and as disparate figures, I hate to admit, as Jay-Z. So please forgive me. I'm going to attempt to stay engaged with you all while I attempt to read some things that I wrote at the same time. Let's just say this. First, I like to say that I Am Not Your Negro is one of the finest, and I'm going to refer to it as a text. You will hear me refer to it as a text a lot. I understand that it's a documentary, but follow me here. It is one of the finest examples of postmodernism that I've experienced in our more contemporary moment. It's a masterful blending of nonfiction, cinematography, documentary, history, personal memoir, along with a myriad of approaches to narrative. So just on a very technical level, it's very well done because it mixes very well different genres and approaches to genres, and it presents it to you in an entertaining fashion. You don't even know these things are hitting you like that. So as I said, I want to present a talk that kind of weaves together some of the themes that hold together a man like Baldwin, a man like Evers, a man like Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, and the traditions within many Black demographics and communities out of which these men spring. My background is in American literature and American history, with a particular focus on African American literatures and histories, and with a particular specialized focus on representations of masculinities and genders and sexualities. And so I believe that I could best serve you all by giving you some insight as regards my fields of specialty. To understand Baldwin's positions as articulated in I Am Not Your Negro, one should be familiar with traditions out of which Baldwin comes. Acting as though he just grew or sprang from nowhere does not serve as generative purpose and would be antithetical to the main thrust of I Am Not Your Negro. In many respects, Baldwin could be considered the embodiment of non-normativity in 20th century America. The strength of his eloquence, in part, stems from the passion with which he addresses the heinous marks of his very non-normativity. In 1968, Baldwin was not received as a normal American man. His supposed race and sexual orientation precluded him from these strains of normativity. Ironically, Baldwin's sexual orientation often worked to ostracize him from the very traditions and institutions developed to address the delimited enjoyment of being an American experienced by most Black people during the latter half of the 20th century. Since the post-Reconstruction era, that is, basically since emancipation, two ideologies have dominated approaches to fighting for social justice on behalf of African Americans in the 19th and 20th century, and have been considered the underpinnings of every post-emancipation civil rights movement to date. One is the Black social gospel, and the other is Black conservative masculinity, or Black conservative masculinism. The Black social gospel is a tradition of thought and activism spanning back to the 1800s. The movement arose during the trauma and abandonment of Reconstruction, resuming the struggle for Black freedom in America. After each attempted move for liberation, from emancipation to Reconstruction to the Harlem Renaissance, there has been a need for an expanded approach to fights for liberation for African Americans. So in many respects, some approach the topic as though the struggle for civil rights and the attainment of full and enfranchisement has never been attained. And so they see post-emancipation struggles and the more modern civil rights struggle, as represented by Martin Luther King, as a continuation of one and the same project. Just the same, new abolitionism reflected in Black social gospel focused on the attainment of social justice on behalf of African Americans and refashioned the demands of antebellum abolitionism for contemporary post-bellum concerns. At its core, the movement sought to engender a sense of modern social consciousness among the African American masses and to destroy the influence and existence of racial caste in America. That is, the Black social gospel was a movement that targeted white supremacy. Moreover, the Black social gospel provided the intellectual underpinnings of the civil rights movement as best evinced by the historic Brown v. Board of Education case. In the wakes of efforts to subordinate and recatalyze, that is, re-enslave Black bodies in the post-bellum era, Black social gospelers not only envisioned what a new abolition should be, but what role African American churches should play in developing the new abolitionism. Some examples of people that are cited as Black social gospelers include people as far removed from us as W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and Alexander Graham Bell, and people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. As a matter of fact, while Martin Luther King may be the most recognized Black social gospeler of our more contemporary times, during the 19th century, Booker T. Washington was the man. Okay? It is true that King is recognized as the most prominent and influential Black social gospeler of the latter 20th century. And as I said, Booker T. Washington is roundly recognized as the dominant Black social gospeler leader of the late 19th century. Baldwin's polemics in I Am Not Your Negro suggests that a new abolitionism is needed in light of the trauma associated with the aftermath of Brown, along with the abandonment of the ideals leading to its advent. So my argument is that just as men like Du Bois and Booker T. Washington recognized that a new abolitionism was needed after the emancipation of the slaves, from Baldwin's perspective, after the disillusionment felt by Brown there's a need for a new abolitionism. The Black social gospel is not a doctrine. It's a movement reflecting a certain ethos, spirit, and zeitgeist from the late 19th century until our current moment. And while it dominates within the African American church, its adherents' relationship to religion and spirituality are often ambiguous and ambivalent at best. Baldwin himself had a tumultuous relationship with Christianity and the church. Still in all, there are two dominant lines of thought associated with the Black social gospel. According to one track of thinking, there is a focus on social ethics and politics, the intersection of ethics, social theory, and power relations. Along the other track, the focus lands upon historical theology, the intersection of modern religious thought and modern philosophical thought. The Black social gospel reflects the union of Black social Christianity, calling upon America to fulfill the Declaration of Independence and the Reconstruction Amendments and the submission to universal laws, and an economically pragmatic ethos equating capitalism with freedom and self-determination. In the Reconstruction era, Black social Christianity was pioneered in what we recognize as the African Methodist Episcopal Church and belonged to a protest tradition within African American thought against the presumed ownership of what was America and who was considered American. That is, the Black social gospel confronts and contests who is recognized as an American citizen and the criteria by which such judgment is made. The names chosen by civil rights and integrationist organizations reflect approaches to such contests and confrontations. For example, organizations that use words like Negro or colored were often received as Organizations that utilized the words Negro or colored were often not received as directly challenging white Americans' selective claim and ownership of America and American. Organizations that chose words like Afro-American, African-American, or Black American were often received as more radical as compared to their colored counterparts. Just the same, the target of Black social gospelers is white supremacy, a structure of power based on privilege that presumes to define what is normal according to conceptions of whiteness and the exclusion of Blackness. In short, according to Black social gospel thought, the crucial thing in combating white supremacy was to build strong Black institutions through which religious commitment could affect social change. So think about that in comparison with Martin Luther King. Black social gospelers focused on social justice, responded to the racial oppression of African Americans, conceived of the United States federal government as an indispensable guarantor of constitutional rights. I have to repeat that one again in our current time. They conceived of the United States federal government as an indispensable guarantor of constitutional rights, struggled to address industrialization and economic injustice, grappled with African American disparities as relates to Great Migration, and affirmed the dignity, sacred personhood, creativity, and moral agency of African Americans. Within this movement of the Black social gospel, Black conservative masculine leadership dominated, right? Scholars suggest that conservative ideas have informed Black social and political thought since the late 18th century. Black conservatism predates the advent of the Black social gospel. Additionally, any comprehensive history of African American thought that ignores the conservative impulse of African Americans will be one-sided and filled with gaps and silences as regards analysis and interpretation. We should be careful to caution ourselves against believing that Black conservatism is an all-encompassing ideology, however. Nevertheless, we should be sure to remember to acknowledge the importance of conservative ideas within the diversity of opinion that is characteristic of African American thought. The Black social gospel has been the touchstone of Black conservative discourse. Black conservatives emphasize the importance of respectability and proper deportment, middle-class morality, Christianity or a firm religious foundation, and a deference to authority. It is easy for one to notice the overlap and similarity shared between Black social gospelers and Black conservatives. While Black conservatism transcends the usual divisions of those who wish to integrate and those who were nationalists, of accommodationalists and radicals, of Bookerites and Du Boisians, of those who followed Malcolm and those who followed Martin, any definition of the term is tenuous at best. Any attempt to define Black conservatism would be delimiting because no definition would be true of all Black conservatives, and many definitions of Black conservatism would be true of many individuals who are not Black conservatives. Most Black conservatives display admiration and respect for American and Western culture and civilization, advocate self-determination, oppose white racism, believe in individual achievement, and are negatively critical of those who agitate past grievances and solicit the government for redress of past wrongs. Booker T. Washington, for example, is famous for being against protest and being mad at the government. Many Black conservatives have demonstrated a disdain for social protests, perhaps explaining Baldwin's early reluctance to jump in the front of the picket line. If we remember in the film, Baldwin starts off lamenting that he was on the sideline riding around while these men were actually in the muck of things. Also, we must remember that his entrance onto the national literary stage was facilitated by his negative critique of Richard Wright and Wright's use of the social protest aesthetics in Native Son. Native Son is the example of African-American literary social protest. Nonetheless, the approach of Black conservatives is to use and to enjoy what is available rather than to wish for or to look for something else. Their faith in America's ability to live up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence has been characterized as unshakable. Here, the Black conservative strain in Baldwin runs deep. For after all his chastisements and declarations of indignity, he demonstrates a faith in the American people that should put us all to shame, considering our contemporary politics. Still, while many believe racism tarnishes what America has been and can be, there are those like Baldwin who hold out hope that what is valuable in America can and will be separated from its terrible legacy. The emphasis on the development of men and male leadership is intense within Black social gospel thought, the likely result of Black social Christian and Black conservative influences. Black social Christians and Black conservatives have sought to address white supremacy and to expose the ephemeral nature of racial caste in America. In an effort to do so, Black social gospelers have attacked the twin pillars of American middle-class patriarchal masculinity and producerist values undergirding white supremacist thought. Normativity within the American public sphere, particularly since emancipation and Reconstruction, has been measured against normative whiteness, i.e. white masculinity. In the 19th century, most Southern whites held the viewpoint that Africans were by nature brutish and barbaric, and that slavery was their only civilizing influence. In an effort to combat such thinking, thinkers like those that belong within the class of Black social gospelers constructed a propulsive masculinity as a countermeasure to white masculinity. But the countermeasure was indeed identical to normative white masculine values focused upon middle-class definitions of manliness. Things like nobility and intelligence and strength and articulateness and loyalty and virtue and rationality and courage and self-control and courtliness and honesty and physical attractiveness according to white Western European standards. So in essence, Black social gospelers and those of conservative masculinist ilk, they basically plagiarized approaches to middle-class white masculinity in an attempt to counterbalance middle-class white masculinity. For many African-American conservatives, the contemporary post-Brown circumstances have been accepted rather than enjoyed. For many Black Americans, connections to middle-class criteria are tenuous. As a result, the reception of many African Americans within the public sphere precludes the full enjoyment of their Americanness, restricting where they may live, where they may work, where they may die in many cases. George Floyd and Breonna Taylor are two extreme examples of African Americans who were not afforded the freedoms to enjoy their full Americanness. Barack Obama, perhaps a subtle example. Past African American social gospelers, people like Booker T. Washington and Du Bois and Alexander Crummell, understood very well the perception of Blacks within the 19th century American public sphere. White Americans would not accept the rights or dignity of Blacks until Blacks lifted themselves to the social standards of whites. At least this was the thinking. So in many respects, these Black social gospelers are in alignment with many Southern whites. And like many Southern whites, men like Crummell insisted that the Black American woman, upon being freed from slavery, was a prostrate and degraded being. Even more, nearly 30 years after the Civil War ended, they claimed her still to be a crude, rude, ignorant mother. America's fascination with the Black pathological mother is rather aged, her negative reception dating back at least to post-Reconstruction America. But many Black social gospelers folded this baleful, misogynist, sexist reading of Black female humanity into their case for elite Black male leadership within Black communities. African-American men such as Crummell and Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, if we're to be honest, must associate and combine energies in order to produce larger values that white America must acknowledge as respectable. For African-American women have failed horribly in such roles. Crummell is not alone in his call for elite male leadership and an elite male leadership class. If you are familiar with the concept of the talented 10th as espoused by Du Bois, this is exactly what Du Bois calls for in his development of a talented 10th. And Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee machine, Tuskegee University, still in existence to this day, is the manifestation of talented 10th ethos. Scholars such as Anthony Stewart demonstrate how African-American exceptionalism, the manifestation itself of American exceptionalism and of talented 10th ethos, and those who reflect it have been accepted from the African-American population as a whole and have usually been made subservient to some larger American interests, put to the ideological and more commercial use of the overarching exceptionalism that defines America itself. Even Baldwin has fallen subject to this. For an example, in the effort to contain and constrict the force of Richard Wright's writing, as demonstrated in Native Son, Wright's writing centered on rage and anger and the displaced within a pre-Brown American society, Baldwin was embraced as the great Black hope by white America, for he stressed conceptions of love. Baldwin has been accepted, that is, pulled out and removed from the protest tradition. And while there may be some merit to accepting Baldwin from the school of right and the school of protest tradition, such merit cannot rest on an absence of rage and passion and seething contempt of racial caste as relates Baldwin, his performances, and his literature. For Baldwin, his performances and his literature are full of rage and passion and seething contempt of racial caste in America, along with conceptions of love. So Baldwin stresses love, for he knows that there is no other alternative for African Americans in the US. We have utilized the power of love for survival and transformative purposes because we have so experienced the retardation and destructiveness of hate. African Americans are not afforded the enjoyment of Americanness to embrace an ethos reflective of give me liberty or give me death in the furtherance of Black liberation. A sentiment expressed by Baldwin himself in the documentary. This is not a sentiment that we can afford. I'm Not Your Negro is a compelling representation of how African American exceptionalism is put to work for American cultural, political, and ideological interests through a momentum over which the individual African American has little or no control. A little more than a century after Du Bois's advocacy of the talented 10th, the relationship between rule and exception has been reversed in white, cliched constructions of African American masculinities. The truly exceptional African American, the criminal, the athlete, the entertainer, has become the model, while the ordinary individual whose only dream is of a normal middle-class life has become seen as something exceptional within Black communities, at least from the outside looking in. Furthermore, the African American exception continues to be called into the ideological service of an overriding American exceptionalism dominated by whiteness. I brought up Jay-Z, Beyonce's husband, earlier, because part of the appeal of Jay-Z is his exception of climbing such an economic and social and political mountain stemming from the projects of Marcy in New York. He is an exception amongst a multitude of project dwellers to have such success. He fits in line with Black social and Black masculinist thought. Nevertheless, in 19th century America, one's manhood was also undergirded by America's overriding exceptionalism as relates global economic markets and one's relationship to such markets. Manhood was defined by production or engagement in the marketplace, character, respectability, and the producer values of industry, thrift, regularity, and temperance. One sees clearly a strain of producerist values in Booker T. Washington's famous Atlanta Compromise speech, when he implores African Americans to cast down their buckets where they are and to get to work industriously. The focus on producerist values dominates Black conservative thought. From men like Campbell to Booker T. Washington to Du Bois to King to Malcolm X to Jay-Z, I would argue, Black conservatives have advocated property ownership, the nurturing of self-determined organizations, and the development of a real African American business class. Engagement within the American economic sphere has been understood as a linchpin to the practice of one's American citizenship, particularly for African Americans whose histories have witnessed them understood as economic objects, but rarely as economic agents. Hence, when Baldwin admonishes the NAACP for its perceived colorism and classism, there is some veracity to his critique based upon Black conservative approaches to manhood. Baldwin's position stems from the fact that the mass of African American men fall outside the criteria of American manhood, or at best have a nebulous relationship to its criteria. As scholar Martin Summers laments, and manliness and its discontents, disenfranchisement implemented at the state level and upheld by state and federal judiciaries between 1890 and the first decade of the 20th century attenuated the links between manhood and citizenships for Blacks, impeding the performances of Blacks within the American economic public sphere and the enjoyment of their Americanness. Black social gospel leaders and influencers often disagreed as regards how to best go about attaining the respect of whites within the American public sphere. That is, they differed on how to attain social justice for African Americans. In part, the Washington-Du Bois polemic, the Martin-Malcolm polemic, is centered on such conflict and differing views of approach. For example, Booker T. Washington's disdain for protests is well acknowledged. While Washington did not seek to agitate Southern whites politically or culturally or economically in the furtherance of Black progress, he did consider the economic elevation of African American masses critical for their advancement in the eyes of whites, particularly since the memories and ideals of the Civil War had not faded. As regards the exceptional American commercial expansion of the late 19th century, men like Booker T. Washington distinctively offered a strategy for Black Americans to participate within the modern marketplace. For his part, Du Bois always contended that African Americans would not win their rights until they produced a body of art compelling of recognition by whites. In The Gift of Black Folk, Du Bois writes of a certain spiritual joyousness, a sensuousness, a tropical love of life, in vivid contrast to the cool and cautious New England reason. A slow and dreamy conception of the universe possessed by the Negro, a drawling and slurring of speech, an intense sensitivity to spiritual values. That is, Du Bois saw a divinely musical eloquence underscoring a great African-American literature to come. For during the post-Reconstruction era, men like Du Bois believed that the time had not yet arrived for the development of a great Negro literature. And while there was a great outpouring of writings by African Americans at the turn of the century, this is when the Harlem Renaissance takes place, the recatalyzing effects of the post-Reconstruction era left African Americans too oppressed to create great literature, in Du Bois's estimation. The great African American literature to come would make use of the musical accompaniment of an enlightened Negro spirit reflecting a peculiar quality. I'm Not Your Negro makes use of America's peculiar use of language for literary generative purposes as relates interrogating and explicating the context of the continued niggerization of Black people in America. And it does so in a Jeremiad-like fashion. The literary genre most characteristic of Black conservative writing is the African-American Jeremiad. The African-American Jeremiad acknowledges racism and white supremacy in America. However, it is primarily directed towards Blacks and is a self-critique of the failure of Blacks to take full advantage of their opportunities, blaming Blacks for their slothfulness, dissipation, parochialism, and reliance on panaceas or magical elixirs to fix America's racial problems. Still in all, the African-American Jeremiad functions as a form of internal and external critical analysis as regards those within and without African-American communities and cultures. For example, David Walker's Appeal, the most important Jeremiad of the 19th century, is a vivid catalog of the many varieties of white and Black wretchedness that exist in America at the time. Although Walker is the premier 19th century example of the African-American Jeremiad, it would be a mistake to limit the Black Jeremiad to conservatives such as Walker. The most notable practitioner in recent decades has been Malcolm X. Malcolm X and the more unabashedly conservative exponents of the genre are all in alignment as regards the conviction that Black problems can only be solved or hindered by Blacks themselves, and that white racism is finally just an irritant that lacks the determinative power to define or circumscribe African Americans as individuals or as a collective. Baldwin's experiences within the American public sphere, as depicted in I Am Not Your Negro, challenge Malcolm's assumptions and purposive uses of African-American Jeremiad traditions. I Am Not Your Negro reflects a Jeremiad-like construction with postmodern flair. Its polyphony reflects not only the voice of Baldwin, but those of Malcolm, Martin, and Medgar as well, all focused through the cinematographic narrative composed by director Raoul Peck. Like the traditional Jeremiad, the documentary offers a critique of the delimited nature of the enjoyment of Americanness experienced by many Blacks in the post-Brown era. The eloquence with which Baldwin addresses the audience directs his didacticism not just at African Americans, but all Americans. Nevertheless, Baldwin provides internal and external critical analysis as regards those within and without African American communities and cultures and their roles in maintaining the status quo as relates racial caste in America. In Baldwin's estimation, white America could begin to address the contemporary state of affairs as regards race relations by answering one simple question. What motivated you to create the Negro? In asking such a question, Baldwin positions himself not only within the African American social gospel tradition of seeking social justice on behalf of African Americans, but in using the literary arts, he does so in a manner advocated by Du Bois by creating art compelling recognition. Our presence here this evening attests to the recognition that Baldwin has and continues to receive. Baldwin rejects the idea that the Black American citizen is a ward of the state or an object of missionary charity. The savage saved by the civilizing ethos of slavery, the Negro, the nigger, some made thing for America's amusement. Moreover, Baldwin's insistence that he is a man not only challenges normative conceptions of manhood as regards race, but is a direct challenge to the Black conservative masculinist leadership ethos dominating many Black churches and civil rights organizations during Baldwin's lifetime. His particular subject position as a homosexual man and relationship to middle-class masculinities underscore his particular criticisms of the church and his suspicions of joining organizations like the NAACP, with its concerned focus on middle-class conceptions of masculinity and respectability politics. By 1968, after bearing witness to the deaths of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, Baldwin could no longer stomach the novelty and surprise expressed by Americans as regards the racialized violence and atrocities that had and continue to take place right before their very eyes. He can no longer remain a passive participant as regards the vivid catalogs of the many varieties of white and Black wretchedness taking place in America. And although he recognized quite accurately that he could be murdered for speaking such truth, he dared to write his story of witnessing how Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin were betrayed and murdered by their fellow countrymen, becoming more of an agent as regards his participation in the struggle. Baldwin dared to bear witness to the attraction of spectacular American terror. I'm Not Your Negro highlights Baldwin's reflections of America's grotesque relationship to the aesthetic of attraction. Attractions represent the alternation of presence and absence embodied in the act of display, reflecting the ghostly and fleeting quality of spectacle. Moreover, an attraction is a temporal, earthly interruption rather than an earthly development. While every attraction would have a temporal unfolding of its own, and some might cause viewers to develop expectations while viewing them, these temporal developments would be secondary to the sudden appearance and then disappearance of the view itself. Making fun is the major engine of an aesthetics of attraction and reflects the dominant approach to 19th century and our current modes of entertainment. 19th century mass entertainment responded to a pleasurable desire reflective of the spectatorial audience members' ability to experience related national unity, not on the basis of an a priori philosophical or theological conviction, but on the basis of an ghostly aesthetic, a taste for states of being in which you, that is, the audience member, yourself, were never quite yourself. That is, the aesthetic of attraction is buttressed by the 19th century conception of making fun or experiencing the ghostly presence of the other. Making fun reflects multiple ways of denigrating and castigating Blackness for purposes of entertainment within the 19th century American public sphere. Fun is a pluralization of fictionality, of multiple ways of denigrating Blackness, a shared experience of imaginative flexibility. Consider the minstrel stage and the blackening of white faces to act out Blackness. That is the very manifestation of acting out a ghostly presence of the other. As I say, making fun of Black people was the dominant feature of mid-19th century mass entertainment, which amounted to finding humor in slavery and making light of the plights of Blacks in bondage. Making fun reflects a readerly hedonics, or readerly pleasure, alive and well within the 19th century American public sphere, centered on audience expectation of racial gratification as regards representations and performances of the other, particularly and specifically as relates Black and Blackness. This making fun, as I suggested, is best evinced by the minstrel tradition and its awful progeny in all of its manifestations, including our contemporary approaches to the comedic. Nonetheless, the documentary continuously represents the American public sphere as dominated by cultural logic, undergirded by the pleasure of making fun and trafficking in racialized cliche as regards African Americans. Even more, American readerly hedonics rarely equate middle-class aesthetics and masculine criteria with Black bodies. When Baldwin interrogates America as regards the motivation for the creation of the Negro, the evidence suggests that America created the Negro to make fun. Consider this aspect of Baldwin's argument and its inherent resonances. For I too am not your Negro. I am your fellow American citizen. That concludes my attempt to interact with you all this evening. I hope that you found my talk somewhat related to the documentary and you found some use in it. I will summarize again. My overall thrust is that Baldwin, Malcolm, Martin, and Negro all stem from similar backgrounds regarding their approaches to social protest and the attainment of social justice for African Americans. All of them in their own way tap into the Black social gospel tradition, and whether it is Baldwin's rejection of certain aspects of Black conservative masculine thought or his embrace, they are all out of the Black masculine conservative tree. And so I thank you all for your attention this evening. And if you all have any, I don't know how this is going to go, Lee, but if you all have any questions or whatnot, I'll be more than happy to address any concerns that you all might have.
Thank you so much. You are just incredible. I think that we are a small enough group. If anyone wants to type a thought or question, or go ahead and
unmute yourself and ask a question like we are capable of doing. I'm fine with any of the above. There are things in the chat, so I will check to see if anybody asked anything. Nope, they just here. Okay, so what y'all got? Did y'all like the documentary? Did y'all have questions about anything presented in the documentary?
You know, I'll just go ahead and chime in. I think I was just struck by the things that James Baldwin was saying years and years and years ago, how much they rang true today.
Yeah.
I appreciate your expanding my knowledge of himself and his personage and his connection to the people of his time. But I was just really struck by how the director had really connected with what was going on in our time today. And you could hear someone sitting on Dick Cavett's couch watching him saying things, and it was like it could have been you could have been saying those things in the last 6 months and it still would have been true.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is why to my students, at least, I try to stress to them the continuum or the continuous nature of the struggle for the full attainment of civil rights. These arguments are well worn and well honed, if you will, and well wrought in many African American communities, because if you look through the lens, as I attempted to argue, if you look through the lens of the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, what one's end game amount to are very simple. They're laid out there in those documents. And one has an understanding of if one is able to live out those ideals or not. And for African Americans, particularly those who had a taste of what could be considered their full enfranchisement during the Reconstruction era, to be embraced within the fold of the American political, economic, social, and all those spheres, and then to have it yanked from beneath your feet overnight, I can only imagine is a disorienting feeling, like we are quarantined in our homes, unable to go outside because outside is not open. And so this desire to live out one's Americanness, I know, at least in my household, it has always been something that has been, a goal and practiced. It's second nature. So it's not shocking to me that the very things that he was arguing for in 1968 are relevant today. He is, in many respects, a beacon with regards to how we understand the post-Brown v. Board of Education era. For we were all looking to a more idealized America after the passage of Brown. And I can only imagine that when emancipation came, we were all looking for a more idealized America then. So the two eras have that at least in common and resonating through them, I would suggest.
I think something that just continues to surprise me as I try to learn and catch up is so much we weren't told or never taught, and how I heard about the Oklahoma massacre from a silly TV show, and it's just so much that and when I actually went and visited the National Historic Site of Brown versus the Board of Education, how little I had heard of it, but I had no concept of why it was there, why they chose Kansas. It was an amazing site too, if you ever have a chance to get over there.
Yeah, I have. I've been both. I'm guessing you're talking about Tulsa, correct? Yeah. I've been both to Tulsa and Little Rock. I have good friends who live in Little Rock, and my wife and I get down to Little Rock a lot. I was impressed by the grandeur of Central High School. To have only seen it on films and in history books, to get there and see how beautifully constructed that school was. We don't make public schools like that anymore.
Right. It's gorgeous. It's striking how big it is.
I agree with you. Yeah.
The gas station across the way, it really kind of helps to step back in time too.
Yeah.
A few years ago, my daughters and I and my husband visited the museum around Little Rock, Central High School in Little Rock. And I agree with you. It was just fast. I was like, oh my gosh, we build buildings that look like cookie cutters. And here is this architectural wonder that has such a significant place in history. I showed the first 20 minutes of this to some students, and one of their comments was, when she was looking at at the posters of the students from Little Rock, who she was talking about. She said, I just can't imagine going to a school where they wouldn't let students in.
Yeah, it's unfathomable, right? Like some of the experiences that our fellows have gone through. I know when I toured it, I began to, that is the school, when I toured the school, I began to have a certain empathy for all involved. And for some of my fellow scholars, it kind of puzzled them because I come from a more radical tradition. But I did not know the school was so beautiful. And this may not sound like the most politically correct thing to say, but I began to understand to a certain degree one's desire to protect it. If that sounds
correct. That's interesting.
Right.
I think I took away from this experience the value of first person experiences. And I thought about, Lee, you know, it's been now maybe 18 months that you were able to take a group of students on and really that rich first person experience of, I was struck whenever I talked to some of our students that people hadn't had the opportunity to go to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. Mm-hmm. Or to Central High School, and those are frankly, those are the only two. I'm very limited in my experiences. Those are the only two first-person accounts I've had the opportunity to see. But I was struck by the richness and the impact of, and here we are in a COVID world where we're visiting by Zoom, which, you know, I'm just struck by how valuable it is to be somewhere.
Yeah, you know, we're talking about history here. So to be able to touch, see, feel, smell. I mean, I'm a bibliophile and I just lose my mind when I get my hands on first editions because I feel like it takes me to a place in time removed from where I am. And I guess that's the point. That's an underlying point that I was trying to make about how visiting the site changed and altered my perception of my approach to the history. It's not that it legitimized or made more correct any positions, but from a position of someone who is trying to conserve and protect what they believe is theirs, that was reinforced with me by the beauty of the school. We don't make public schools like that. And it also reinforced that there was a time in American history where we really were invested in the public education of our citizens. And on the contrary, it also reinforced that there came a time in our history where we became not so concerned about the education of our public citizens. And that school and its continued upkeep is an iconic reminder of such things, but such history in all of our places of locale, from the biggest cities like New York to some of the smallest towns like Sedalia, have this living history sprinkled all around them if you know where and how to look. And so I think that there are places all around us. As you say, we are visiting in a Zoom environment, but there are places all around us that we could provide access to our students to have more of a first-person encounter with some of these historical epics and events that we discuss in our classes.
My husband and I are big national park attendees, so we're trying to go to all of them. And I think that the Park Service has come a long way in the last 10 or 15 years by really doing a much better job and getting more sites, you know, beyond just Brown versus Board of Education and the high school. But Carter G. Woodson is a brand new site that we got to go to in DC, and the Pullman neighborhood, which is a brand new site up in Chicago. It is being able to go there. Their Facebook pages have a lot of great videos, and the National Park site does too. But, you know, we were able to see the Charles Young site, and that was really amazing because a fraternity actually cares for that site. And so it was a lot of, the fraternity brothers are the ones that actually give you a tour of the Charles Young site.
Yeah, the national parks are really cool. Like a lot of times the best people to talk to at our national parks are like the security guards that work there. I know that I'm here in St. Louis, and I had to be about 10 or maybe 15 years ago. I looked up and I was like, you know, I've never been into the old courthouse as the museum that it is. It's an iconic feature of the city under the St. Louis Arch. And I went in, and the security guard there, he captured me for about 45 minutes and just gave me a rundown of everything. And all of us are probably very familiar with Dred Scott and Dred Scott's attempted suing for his piece that was adjudicated in the courthouse down there. But I was unaware that Dred Scott is just one of over 400 cases of African Americans suing for their freedom in that old courthouse downtown. And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. You guys talk about what we learn and what we don't learn. We know all about Dred Scott and Taney and the Supreme Court and la, 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 la. There were more than 240 plus cases where African Americans were successful in suing for their freedom in St. Louis, Missouri, the compromised state, the state where we come in as a slave state and Maine come in as a free state. More than 240 cases were successfully prosecuted for the attainment of liberation for African Americans in St. Louis, Missouri. And I never would have known that had it not been for the security guard guy that worked down there. And he directed me to where the records were kept and everything. And so that's why I learned about the archives associated with the old courthouse and the St. Louis History Museum and all of those other, the Missouri Historical Society and stuff. So yeah, when you go to our parks from like Yellowstone to whatever, you know, knocking stuff off, these impromptu desks we have in our homes. When you go like when we open up outside again, I think that the security guards and the people, like the people who work there, they generally know a great deal about the stuff. Grace has been waiting patiently to make a point. Did you want to make your comment, Grace, or ask your question?
Yeah, so kind of going back to Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, in my high school, we had a teacher who knew that all of us grew up in a very small town that was very closed off from the world. And so he really made it a point to teach us about the civil rights movement and all of the stuff that we really wouldn't see a lot of just because of where we're located. Okay. And so after doing a lot of research on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., I've been thinking about if another civil rights leader were to rise up in today's day and age, what blanking on the word, but what attributes would you find the most compelling for our generation if a civil rights leader were to step up into position like Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X did?
First, let me say, and I hope I don't throw water on your fire, there are not, at least from the generation that I come from, so maybe it's someone from a generation like yourself, and I'm just being biased because you sound like you're a little younger than me, and I have hope for our young people. But the point I was about to make is like, Martin and Malcolm scared a lot of people. And what I mean by that is, just as JFK scared a lot of people. And what I mean by that is they got dead. And so since that generation, the desire to ascend to a singular leadership type position as a figurehead that is on the national scene is a bit of a cautious and intimidating and scary one. I mean, we saw what the governor of Michigan is going through today, right? And so there has been a desire to invest in young people and to spread concepts like love and compassion and humanity amongst young people with the hope that when they become adults, that is how they will interact with one another. I hate to sound cheesy and corny and not to have a better answer for you, but right now I feel like our human condition is so focused on hate and separation and not things that bring us together, that what we need in a leader is someone who can talk to us and unite us and get us to see our common humanity, because we're dealing with a global pandemic and it's killing us. And, so, there are bigger things that are threatening our existence as a species, that perhaps if we could get someone who was empathetic towards the human condition, however it might present itself, so that we could find common ground to talk with one another and see one another in our counterpart, that is what I would look for in a leader. I'm looking for someone who makes me feel good about being an American, makes me feel good about the things that we are doing, that does not sit and look for ways to make us criticize one another for being Americans or exclude one another for being Americans. So I don't know, I guess I'm super ideal. Bring me somebody from the peace loving 60s or something. I don't know. I need a RFK who ain't got the elitist wealthy background. I need a RFK from the people is what I need. If that answers your question. All right.
Yes, thank you very much.
Not that I got a problem with rich people. They just not poor. So they don't understand a lot of things sometimes.
I have a question, Tarrell, if I may. This is Stephanie Gutierrez. So I do a lot of work in economic development, community development, and we work around, and I work with tribes, American Indian tribes. We work around decolonizing the economic system. So just decolonizing systems in general. And a lot of the things that you spoke about were things that I was wondering about throughout the movie, but they're not openly, the idea of like Black conservative masculine leadership. Mm-hmm. So I'm in a lot of BIPOC spaces. Mm-hmm. And we are, one of the things that has worked in Native communities is, and I am Native myself, so one of the things we use is to talk about the values, our cultural values. So values that were pre-colonization, and those that have been held on throughout since then. So you talk about white masculine values, okay? And a lot of where that happened in the Black community is where a lot of our tribal men are right now. It's really basically dressing up in suits, and it's that power dynamic. So how do I speak to Black cultural values when it comes to wealth and how wealth is defined? And because he tips on that in the movie too. I mean, he talks about the impact it's had and the capitalist impact and how capitalism is playing out, and we see it. I see it with Jay-Z. So I'll let you answer.
No, you make me take my jacket off.
Oh no.
You got me sweating, and I ain't gonna sweat my jacket out. Okay. So here's what I try to stress to my marginalized BIPOC folk of these here United States. While we are trying to do things to better our communities and the communities that we come from, we got to give ourselves certain breaks on certain things. We are American. We are caught up and complicit in the American project. End stop. Full stop. I go around here professing that I am African American, but getting back to Black conservative masculine thought, it's nothing that I ever thought permeated through my bloodstream. It wasn't until my wife, and here is where I'm trying to get to an answer to your question. It wasn't until my wife began to ask me if I thought that I could develop a performance and practice of masculinity that was not only helpful and healthy for me, but was helpful and healthy for her. Because all of this trying to be strong, trying to be courageous, trying to be the breadwinner, it was crushing her spirit And it was limiting the space that she had in which to act. And she did not like that. So you can imagine my household was not happy. Okay. And so I thought it was the way to be until somebody taught me that perhaps it wasn't. And I didn't think I was doing anything bad or selfish because I was performing me. But when she put it in a language that said, can you do something that takes me into consideration? It let me know just how selfish that performance was. So what I would consider as a strategy or tactic, if such men claim that they love their community and they love the women who are part of the community and they don't see no difference between men and women and we all equal, and because you know a lot of men be talking BS. Like I thought I was true to the game, and I was still. We're disillusioned sometimes because we're caught up in these masculine practices, right? But if they really say that, then it will challenge them to live it out if you present such to them. Okay, but the way you're doing your thing is preventing me from doing my thing. And don't get me wrong, some men know exactly what they're doing. They know that the way that they perform things, as a matter of fact, them performing and precluding you from performing it lets them know who they are. So that's what they get off on. But in these communities where we claim we are about healthy rehabilitation of the community, then we challenge people to act accordingly. You know, I love my wife, so I've been trying. I still fail horribly at times, and she still lets me know horribly at times, and I still try to adjust my behavior at times. I've come to an understanding that I may not ever perfect this thing, but my goal is the ideal goal of being much better than I was the day before. Sometimes I relapse. She goes to her sisters. So, that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask also your perception, because especially looking at the film and Baldwin in this post-Brown landscape and bringing up the high school and the spectacle of investment and value perhaps we used to make in public education. I know that, so we showed the Pruitt-Igoe myth years ago and looked at how post-Brown versus Board of Education kind of gutted the dreams and idealism of public housing because of white flight and redlining and what that did in terms of real estate and geographical segregation. Do you think that, sorry, this is kind of a leading question, but do you think that there's kind of a similar parallel in terms of investments and value of public education post-Brown?
Oh, for sure. You know, it's in the post, like, I was amazed at how open and public America was pre-Brown. You want to know when your country clubs go private? You want to know when the golf courses go private? You want to know when your swimming pools go private? You want to know when your community centers go private? You want to know when your schools go private? It's post-Brown. You want to know when your parks go private? All of these things go private in the post-Brown era. Because see, pre-Brown, Jim Crow kept everything in order. You didn't have to have private this, that, and the third, right? I mean, I live here in St. Louis. During my childhood, the Hill was a sundown section of St. Louis, right? So we're not talking long ago. So yeah, I totally believe that is when the divestment in public education began. Now, whether or not it's a correlation or causation between white flight and these investment patterns, we can argue about that. The political scientists and the economists can bring in all their graphs and so on and so forth. But being a family that migrated from Washington County, Mississippi, to Earl, Arkansas, to St. Louis, Missouri, to the Pruitt-Igoe, across the street from on Jefferson and Cass to North St. Louis housing, and then branches went to the military and moved to North County and places like Ferguson and so on and so forth. I'm well acquainted with these patterns, right? The school right up the street from my house right now, Blewett elementary school looked like it was built in the pattern of Brown. The upkeep on it, they're going to be selling it next next year, probably, right? So you drive around a city like St. Louis, you see the manifestation of the question that you asked me, and it becomes a question not worth asking when they're selling school buildings and turning them into loft apartments. That lets you know right there what's going on, economically speaking, with regards to the outlook of the St. Louis public school system and its ethos regarding educating the children of St. Louis. So, it has, and it's it reflects itself in our colleges and our universities with these ever rising tuition prices and so on and so forth. Education is a commodity that has been privatized for those who can afford it. Sorry. No, we try to do better, right? And hopefully one of the things, although it has been very irritating, and for some, some socioeconomic classes, it is problematic. But hopefully this Zoom environment is kind of, on one hand, I know it's problematic, but leveling the field on another, right? Because if you can get to the technology, anyone has access to anyone, right? But we got another big if in there though, right? Right, as I sit here on my Apple Mac that is provided by WashU, right? So I surely understand. I surely understand. Got some stuff in the chat. What we got?
Anybody have any thoughts or questions? Grace, do you have your hand up again, or is it still up from before?
It's still up from before. Sorry, I didn't realize you had to undo it.
What we got from we got one new message. You're in your PJs, huh? Anybody got any other questions? I know it's getting a little late in the evening here. You don't have to ask. I'll ask.
Hi. This is Robin Walter. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It's been really great, very great. I did have an observation in the film and was just wondering, kind of curious about your perception about the role of Hollywood and filmmaking and social media. Baldwin really had, he was almost a film critic in his own time. And I'm just wondering what you think he might have thought today about how has Hollywood changed and either helped or hindered this process?
I think that Baldwin, it would be nuanced and sophisticated enough to recognize certain areas of progress that have been made in Hollywood. But I think that his acute sense of analysis would recognize the continuation of certain tropes and approaches to storytelling that are problematic as they were during his time. We have not, the truth about the entertainment, in my opinion, the truth about the entertainment field in America, particularly the visual fields, posters and movies and things of this sort, is we have not moved very far from the minstrel tradition. We have taken the minstrel paint off, but we haven't moved very far from it. And you see the vestiges of it in everything from our biracial cop movies like Lethal Weapon, right? To, our variety shows that are on television, from everything like In Living Color. I don't know what the latest manifestation is because I'm getting old. But, our, what do we have? To Nick Cannon's Wild and Out, right? That's probably the most contemporary that just got taken off because he made some stupid remarks in the public sphere, right? But Nick Cannon's Wild and Out, a variety comedy show that came on either VH1 or MTV1, right? We see the vestiges of the origins of our approaches to these fields and how they or they spring from Blackness, either our critique of, playful commentary upon, or so on and so forth. So, we can remove Uncle Ben from the box, but the fact that we had to remove Uncle Ben from the box still says something about us in this contemporary time, right? So I hope the point that I'm trying to make gets to you. I don't think Baldwin would, he may be impressed by the number of Black and colored bodies that we have populating Hollywood, I think he would be disappointed that the game of Hollywood has not really much changed. And I say this with a particular, and here I'm going to drop a, what do they call it, a humble brag. I say this with a particular insight, for I went to not only high school, but college with Sterling K. Brown. And I went to college with he and his wife. And we get these horror stories about the continued misogyny and racism that continues to exist in Hollywood. Issa Rae is a good friend of ours, and her whole production company and ethos for being in the film industry is to give more light to Black voices and so on and so forth. So, you know, the struggle still continues on many ways. And we must remember that, you know, it's not like we've been devoid in this area. Oscar Micheaux is getting on some time now, right? So the stories and the critiques have been there, and the complaints are still similarly the same. See Harvey Weinstein. So, you know, that's what I would say about it.
Right, kind of back to the first point, or the first person who had a question that said he almost was writing as if he was living today.
Yeah, Baldwin is, if you, I think that if you are honest to your humanity, I don't think human beings require a great deal. I think we are complicated beings, but I don't think we require a great deal outside of things like love, trust, and security, right? And so when those things are lacking, you know, there's pretty much a pattern into the complaints of them. I mean, if you were to read Baldwin juxtaposed against certain writings from the French Revolution, you'd be like, man, they got a lot in common. If you were to read Baldwin juxtaposed against certain Russian peasant voices, you'd be like, man, they got a lot in common, right? Because those who have feet upon their necks, they have a pretty common refrain. Please get your damn foot off my neck, you know, and no matter how it comes out, it has that same. My students today, and I was so happy that they saw it, because I had them reading Kimberly Crenshaw and I had them reading Sojourner Truth. And they're like, dang, Dr. Campbell, Sojourner Truth was doing intersectionality a long time ago. I was like, yeah, because women have been making these complaints forever, right? It's like, we got some new language to capture how they feel, but it doesn't take much to do. Stop treating me like that. However you want to understand, let all your ideas intersect in, dude, stop treating me like that, right? So yeah, it is, I think that human arrogance leads us to believe that we have some type of epiphany with regards to our needs and concerns. I mean, my nephew knows when the stove is hot. He only has to put his hand on it one time, and he's not gonna touch it anymore when it's that color. And he's like 2.5, and he burnt his finger, and now he's scared of everything red, right? So we don't like pain, you know, we don't like discomfort. We don't. The human condition is pretty simple when you narrow it down. You have to twist your mind to some other concepts of humanity to believe, like, Black women don't have pain in childbirth. Like, how is that possible? Right? Like, I don't get that. Like Mexicans just want to come here from Mexico and steal everything. Like, they went 1,300 miles through muck and mire to come here and start a better life. Like, some of these things just don't make any sense unless you have decided that you wish to twist your mind to have a certain interpretation. And that probably says more about us or you as the thinker than it does the thing that you're analyzing and thinking about, or the person that you're analyzing and thinking about. So, and I will say that, you know, for me, being married has certainly changed my outlooks on approaches to things for the better, because I just didn't realize how selfish I was before I got married. And I want to keep reiterating this. And I thought I was a good guy. And I'm pretty sure that I was in some respects. I just wasn't the good guy that I thought I was, right? I don't know why. I think the focus on individualism and career gain and all these things that we see as part of our, you know, to be all sappy, our Protestant work ethic, part of our construction of our ethos as a country. I think those things sometimes have us overlook the human parts. right? And we forget that in the midst of all of this, all these great creations that we're coming up with, they're supposed to be there for people, right? I mean, so anyway, I digress. Anybody else, are y'all ready to get to Thursday night football?
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. We're just so fortunate that you spent your evening with us. Thank you.
I always enjoy my time with you all. It was one of the better experiences I had. What was that, 2018?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It was one of the highlights of my 2018, only rivaled by the Belle de Costa Green conference, and that's because I did not think I was going to be able to pull that off with the budget that it had. But you very much have been a joyful entrance into my life, and so I sincerely thank you for reaching out to me. I have thoroughly enjoyed interacting with you all tonight. At the risk of being facetious and assuming things, I will put my email in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to me in the future. I'm always open for conversation and salon type discussion. That is French salon type, not go to the beauty shop salon type, all right? Although my wife does make me sit in the beauty shop. Anyway, let me stop talking. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. If any of you all would like to reach out to me in the future, you're more than welcome to do so. And I'm gonna stop talking.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tarrell.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
You all have
Thank
a
you.
and I hope to hear from you in the near future, my friend. I like this coupleship that we have made here. It seems to work well.
Let's keep it up. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Y'all be easy now.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good evening.